Hi folks, this is your MWIS Planning Outlook as we take you towards the weekend and beyond. Some more very wet conditions to come across Western Scotland through the rest of this week, with various frontal systems coming through, some high rainfall totals shown up here, even coarse resolution forecast models indicating 75 to perhaps 100 millimetres of rain, and some spots over the Western Mountains could get much more than that. So risk of flooding, very wet conditions underfoot, streams fast flowing for several days ahead. Some high rainfall totals further south as well over the hills, although not quite as dramatic, but still some pretty wet conditions coming through at times. Drier further south and east. The ongoing story still keeps western and northwestern Scotland pretty wet further forwards, the totals showing a little bit lower by comparison, but still rain at times, maybe more showery in nature some of the times. Relatively drier further south and east again, but still some rain to come from time to time. Temperatures are on the milder side, even feeling quite warm and humid, quite muggy at times through the remainder of this week as the flow is from the south to southwest, with nearer to average temperatures just toward the north of Scotland. Some very hot temperatures too across Spain and Portugal right now. The trend still suggests that we're near or a little bit above average, mainly towards the southern portions of Britain in the further outlook. Scotland becoming cooler, near or even maybe some below average temperatures in there at times, just depending on exactly what the airflow pattern is. So trending cooler, but nothing too significant shown up as yet on the models, but one or two hints maybe start to draw in a few chillier days. The charts then for the days ahead still showing some rather challenging weather conditions across the hills and mountains. Wednesday sees a cold front sinking southeastwards across the Highlands, some pretty wet conditions in the morning across the western Scottish mountains. The focus of that around Loch Lomond into the central southwestern portions of the Highlands there. That may be just easing off a little bit to become more showery through the daytime across the west and the northwest. That band of rain will sink southwards. Some drizzly conditions for West Wales and Lake District, that rain becoming more persistent in the lakes through the afternoon into the evening time. Strong to gale force winds across the higher mountains, especially gusty ahead of that cold front. Speeds may moderate somewhat across the Highlands. Thursday sees some further fronts trying to push in from the Atlantic. There's a ridge of high pressure to the south, which is looking a bit less convincing than it did even a few days ago. It may mean that some places see some dry conditions for a while. North East Scotland, the eastern side of the Pennines, around East and Mid Wales and the Peak District doing the best for some dry and brighter weather. But a lot of cloud cover, some drizzly damp conditions across many western hills and mountains, and that drizzle turning into more persistent, steadier rain across western Scotland up to about Skye and Torridon. Small amounts though further into the Cairngorms. Speeds of wind will tend to strengthen as we head onwards through the day as well, south to southwesterlies becoming quite gusty near to the west coast. Friday stays rather blustery as well, quite a marked increase of speed with height, so it may not seem too much on lower slopes, but the speeds on the tops are likely to be gale force and strengthening through the day, maybe becoming severe gales across the tops in the Highlands, so be aware of that one. We have a waving frontal system around as well, and that will be around from late Thursday into Friday as well, which is where some of the bigger rainfall totals are starting to mount up in western Scotland through this time. So a very wet picture here. Much lower rainfall totals further east, bit of a rain shadow effect across the Cairngorms once again. Drizzly, damp conditions across the western hills of England and Wales. It may be very low rainfall totals to measure, but it could still be a day that does get you very much soaked through in the cloud cover that will be very damp, misty, humid air, so a lot of moisture coming onto those western fells and mountains in England and Wales. Some breaks in the cloud across East and Mid Wales and across towards the Peak District, where it will stay substantially dry. Now, the detail into the weekend is very complicated in some of the subtle elements of the forecast. It's fair to say that high pressure is likely to be toward the south, and it will draw in some quite mild, if not warm, and humid conditions across England and Wales, where it's likely to stay substantially dry. Again, there may be some low cloud and misty, drizzly conditions at times near to some of the western coasts around the Irish Sea. Windy across Scotland, and those speeds could touch gale force on the tops again. I'm not quite convinced the wind flow turns as much westerly as this chart would suggest, and that cold front could be much further back around in the Atlantic, so there's a bit to play for in the forecast there. I'm not quite convinced about that particular chart at this stage though. What looks fairly likely is that that low pressure system will be a complicated feature with a few different centres out to the west and northwest of Britain, and maybe that hint at the cold front, as mentioned, is still further back out over the Atlantic at this stage. So either way, it still leads to Western Scotland possibly seeing quite a wet day, especially towards the northwest, drier further east across the Highlands. It does still keep the zone of high pressure to the south, so those drier and quite warm conditions would be felt through England and Wales. If I run the story onwards through into Sunday off this model chart, and again, uncertainties of detail, but still there's low pressure to the north, there's high pressure to the south, there's a front somewhere draped into Western Scotland, and there's still the risk of some further rain coming through here quite persistently. That may break up into showers a bit from the north, but still looking like rain is around for western mountains in Scotland. Drier still again for most of England and Wales, but some low cloud and drizzle could still be close to the Irish Sea, and it stays with temperatures on the milder side. Really tricky into next week. Look at the slack pressure patterns. There's not much to pick apart in terms of the detail there. Bits and pieces of rain around. There's some further areas of low pressure, possibly toward the north of Scotland. Uncertainty is exactly how that develops. Again, a westerly wind flow is around. There's the possibility that that low develops and deepens. It could get tangled up with the low that's away toward the west of Spain and Portugal as well. And one way or the other, that brings the risk of some further rainfall spreading in through the middle of next week. Just look at the wind flow direction though. There is that scope to start turning things more toward the northwest, so cooler conditions are likely to be developing onwards through next week. So temperatures dropping from the very mild values that may be around through the weekend into something quite a bit chillier. Some fluctuations of temperatures are possible then heading into the middle of the month, but I think we may just tap into those cooler, if not colder air masses at times then coming around from the northwest, but still with some incursions of milder west to southwesterly flows in there. There's still a trend of low pressure, the blue colours on this chart being nearby, basically through into the second half of the month. That would keep things rather unsettled again. We've been looking for signals for higher pressure trying to build a bit more substantially, and some of the model charts a week ago when we looked at these were a bit more convincing of trying to build a high. There's still a suggestion it's around Scandinavia and maybe further east. It struggles to get anywhere near us on the latest modelling. There's a subtle hint of maybe some ridging in the upper airflow patterns, but it's all a bit tentative at this stage. If anything, you have to go further into early November before the colours on this chart turn to the positive colour in terms of being higher than average pressure, which would suggest eventually that higher pressure is trying to build, but as often is the case on these forecast models, it does seem to get knocked further back down the line. So we'll watch these carefully. Not easy to judge the exact details and timings of that, but maybe some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of some more settled weather developing. Whether we do get that in later October or it's further ahead, we'll wait and see. For now, it's changeable and expect some chillier days in the next 10-day to 2-week outlook. I hope that is useful to you. All your local information for 3 days ahead, of course, every day on our website. That's your planning outlook. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.